As Ruben already introduced, I'll be talking about how machine learning can help for conservation, forests, and farms. To be honest, I'll be talking mostly about conservation today, but most of these techniques can also be applied to farming. I'll start with a short introduction, and indeed I'll then take off where Ruben left us, starting with high-resolution images and going down to the ground level and finally going down to macro level. Yes, some of you might be wondering how conservation is directly related to mitigating climate change. The truth is probably a lot more complex, but here are a couple of numbers which already indicate a nice relationship. All of the forests in the world, they capture about 7.6 billion tons of CO2 per year. That's netto, so they're also emitting. But that consists of about 300% of the European emissions or 150% of the US yearly emissions. So it's quite considerable. It boils down to about 2 tons per hectare. And beside that, there's also the role of animals that they play in that. That's of course in keeping the ecosystem intact. And as we've all been discussing, how can machine learning make a difference in this? Today we often have the idea that experts, they get a certain input, they have a certain knowledge, and based on that they make a certain decision. But what we see is that for conservation projects, it's often not very scalable. There's not direct money to be made of it. There's no companies directly investing in it, making it difficult to do these initiatives. And that's actually where AI can help. By actually leveraging the limited knowledge, the knowledge of experts in a limited way, we can make a machine learning model that can scale this knowledge to other people and to other projects to then get a dashboard, and then we can, based on that, get other expert insights to finally come to the same decisions again on a much larger scale. So to kick off, I'll be going over a couple of use cases here, more in detail. The first one is one that we're actually working on right now, and it's to monitor endangered plants. So here is already a good explanation of why this scale is it's very difficult. It's trained biologists who are on the field recognizing certain plants, seeing, okay, where is it occurring, where is it not occurring anymore, and to bring this, to map this out for a whole continent, it's a huge effort. But what we can do is we have them, for a limited set of fields, label data from drone images. Based on that, we train a model that recognizes these images. I recognizes the plants on these images at least. And if we then get citizen scientists to fly over large areas of fields, we can recognize the plants on this, stitch this together, and actually recreate a map like the one over here. It's an example, by the way, it's not actually a real one. And where people can actually drill down to this kind of level where you actually see the plants recognized on the field. Another example is something that Ruben already mentioned. We can monitor animal populations. A concrete one is actually tracking whales. In the ocean, it's of course not very easy to track them. It's typically done by boat, either by plane or also manually on aerial images. For a huge space like an ocean, it's very difficult to track this whole population. So if we can actually leverage satellite images, we can do this quite extensively. And there is already a specific machine learning approach where they train a model first to scan over the ocean in large parts. They detect patches where there might possibly be a whale at that time. And then another model actually goes in, looks at a closer level of detail, and can detect the specific whales. So it's very similar to the approach mentioned before. How would it look like? It's a dashboard or an interactive map showing where the populations of whales are in a certain time. And who will use it? It will probably be scientists and policymakers. Moving on to the ground level. Also here, we'll be actually moving a bit away from the remote sensing topic that Ruben brought us. So up until here, that's still what we call remote sensing. From now on, it will just be normal machine learning applications, let's say. Also here again, monitoring wild animal populations on the ground then. You probably all know the camera traps used in forests by rangers. They place a camera somewhere. Of course, tracking the footage all the time is not very interesting because it takes way too long. What they already put was having a motion sensor. When a certain animal comes close, it detects a motion and it starts taking a picture or filming. But you can also go a step further. We can train a model directly to recognize also which species are on the images, so they can have a nice overview of at which time, which place, which animals were detected. And it allows us to do this as a much larger scale. At the same time, images only, it allows you to look at a very small place in the forest, right? If you can imagine what you can see on a small image placed somewhere in the forest, using microphones, it allows them to monitor a larger patch of time, space at the same time. So for example, when elephants are moving through the forest, using a microphone, they can detect where they're occurring and follow troops in that way. It also has a double function. Also when poachers are moving through the forest, this allows them to be detected. Then as the last part, there's also the machine learning effort. It's called the PAUSE project done by Harvard University, and they're active already in Africa, where they actually predict animal and poacher behavior. And based on this, they will optimize the routes of rangers in the park to increase their chance of encountering either animals or rangers. Then who will use this? Of course, the park rangers. How will it look like? Either a dashboard or a map with suggested routes. And then a bit closer to home, still monitoring animals on a day-to-day basis, mostly here in Europe. There is Ops Identify. It's an app made by Observation International, and it's actually related also to Natuurpunt in Belgium. So what is this app? Maybe some of you already have it on your phone. You can take images of animals outside. It's specifically made for taking images in the wild. And you can then detect which animal it is or which plant it is. So which is quite nice. So for the more curious around us, it's interesting to detect what you actually see. And you kind of leverage the expert knowledge and bring it closer to everybody else. At the same time, it also allows scientists to then build up a database. It's called observation.org or waarneming.be, where they actually can have a nice overview of all the animals that are scanned, animals or plants, which allows them to then do research on that. Where are plants occurring? Where are animals occurring? Is it more in the city center? Is it really in specific zones? Are they not occurring in another place anymore? As you can imagine, a lot of interesting research can be done based on that. So it's a benefit for both citizens on the one hand and scientists, of course. So check it out if you don't have the app yet. It's Ops Identify, pretty easy to find in the App Store. Then the micro level, this is also a really interesting case. It's by a UK-based, UK-US, they're spread across both organizations. They're called World Forest ID. They're also working together with a number of universities. Can't really remember the exact institute. And what they do is they actually build up a database of wood samples, but also a number of food samples, among other. It's soybeans and cocoa. And they're building up a database from all over the world where they take wood samples from all different kinds of forests and places. And they do a certain analysis on it, both microscopical, but also checking chemical reactions. And based on that, they can actually construct a fingerprint for this. Then afterwards, when there's actually a border control at customs, they can take samples from certain pieces of wood, certain food samples, and they can compare this against the database. And based on that, they can see which type of product it is, if it's the same that's been said on the description, or if it's another type of wood, for example, but also where it's coming from. And this can actually help them flag illegally sourced wood or illegally sourced soy or cocoa. which is of course very interesting in the fight against illegal deforestation, for example. And I think that was my last example. So to conclude, I think conservation has a big role to play in the effort of reducing net emissions. And the main part where it come in is to reduce the prohibitive costs of efforts like these. So now you can ask all of your questions to all of us, I think, because this is the last one.